Hello and welcome to another episode of Smart Talk. Today we're getting back to discussing the issues facing young people, issues that the left must have clear answers to, and that issue is social media bans. Here in Britain, the Labour government will roll out a social media ban for under 16s in early 2027. Australia already announced a similar ban in December 2025. Canada is currently proposing one. They have a bill in Parliament discussing such a ban. And other countries such as Denmark, France, Germany, Greece, Italy, Norway are considering measures in a similar vein to restrict social media for youth to varying degrees. Now, this is a topic we addressed in the latest issue of Women in Revolution, which is on the theme of youth oppression. And we have a couple of articles in that issue on social media bans because this is becoming a political question. So to discuss this, I'm joined today by Comrade Tom, author of one of those articles on Britain. It's called Youth Need a Future, Not a Social Media Ban. Hi, Tom.
Hi, all right.
Yeah, good. How are you?
Good.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks for making the time. So look, as I mentioned, a whole bunch of countries, mostly Western countries, are pursuing similar measures. I want to start off by talking about a general question, which is why is this important for the left to address?
Yeah.
This is about kids under 16 who should not be on social media.
Yeah.
Why should communists, leftists, socialists care about this question?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think broadly speaking, there are kind of three main points. Firstly, this is really just a starting point in terms of how the government intervenes online. And there have been various measures such as the porn ban and so on before this. But what the British bourgeoisie really kind of want is a digital ID. Now, it's been rejected numerous times, obviously recently by Starmer, but in its predecessor proposal, way back under Blair. And what that would mean, for example, if we look at how the police used social media to target pro-Palestine supporters over the last 2 years, it kind of, there's still a certain layer of anonymity, particularly for those that are more cautious, and it kind of just gets rid of that. So, for pro-Palestinian people, trade unionists, socialists, those who don't conform to the views of the government, particularly when it's a hot topic, they would, down the line, they're going to be way more at risk if they don't put up a fight now. I think secondly, a lot of young people are rightly very angry, really hate this ban, and the left needs to win them over, If you're for this ban, then you're immediately putting a pretty big obstacle in the way of trying to win those people over. And then thirdly, I think, as we'll get into more later on, this question is only really about social media on the surface of it. Of course, that's the immediate thing we're dealing with, but it really reflects the rottenness of society in general. So if you want to actually, deal with the problem, if you want to approach this question seriously, it's not really a debate about social media, but how do you actually provide a way forward for youth in general and society? So I think...
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I think that's well said. So if it wasn't clear already, we're opposed to this ban because of all the reasons Tom's just laid out. Now, I want to pick up on the last point, which is the rottenness of society. This is something we talk about a lot, maybe not so much on this show, but Workers' Hammer, it's a regular podcast of our British comrades where they regularly comment on events happening in Britain and really the rot in this society. So let's give our listeners a bit of a sense of what Britain is like, especially for youth. What do you mean when we say the rot in society and how the social media question is really a surface expression of that? Give us a bit of a sense.
Well, we don't call this country Broken Britain for no reason,
Fair enough, yeah.
If you go back to, let's say, the mid-80s, neoliberalism had already started, but this was really the moment where Thatcher was empowered to take on the miners. Why is that important? Because the miners were the most militant section of the working class, right? And she knew by crushing them that the rest of the labor movement would be on its knees, right? there are kind of a few exceptions here and there, but for the most part. So once the miners were crushed, what then proceeded were, continuous attacks on industry over the last 30 years, and it's still going on today, except the difference is today that there's very little industry left. In fact, there's almost like no industry in this country anymore,
Yeah.
And it's obviously the same in other Western countries, although I think in Britain, like it's kind of, at least when you take the kind of top imperialist countries, I don't think deindustrialization is as bad anywhere as it is here.
Yeah, I think Britain is an advanced state of just being hollowed out from the inside.
Mm-hmm. So take that, and then so you're a young person, particularly, outside of London. I mean, London's a different thing. Maybe we can come back to that, but
yeah, we definitely should.
And generally, there are metropolitan cities that are a bit different, but for the most part, so much of this country just has nothing. You're a kid in school, you're doing your GCSEs, you pass them or whatever. Then it's like kind of, well, do I go and do an apprenticeship, which will pay me 14 grand a year? And, maybe that will open up probably more doors than going to uni, but
yeah, these days, for sure.
It kind of, on the face of it, it's not the most.
You can't live on that wage.
Well, exactly. You
Absolutely
still have to live with your parents. And again, it's not like you're guaranteed a job after that. Or you could go to college and go to university, which, then you've got a degree. Great. That doesn't really mean anything anymore. So you kind of just have for young people who are at school right now, there's really just this situation where there's a lot of despair and hopelessness, It's like, what's the point in just doing my GCSEs and all of this? Never mind, going into work, all of that.
No, I definitely agree that you've got a point there. I think one thing that is a pretty noticeable trend is how frequently you will get in the mainstream bourgeois papers like The Guardian, the Financial Times, almost on a weekly basis about how difficult it is to find jobs for university graduates, how a university degree doesn't mean the same thing anymore. The debt crisis is becoming a real discussion in Britain, I think. So those are all things. I think the other thing is the London and not London, the north-south, southeast divide. That's you can't understand this country without that. But you said apprenticeships. Like today, yeah, that will probably open some more doors for you. But if you're really looking outside of London, like the chances that a kid in like a town in northern England will be able to access the same type of apprenticeship, in his or her town compared to like a larger city, like they're vastly different, So where you are, it really does seal in your chances in many ways about the access you have to future options. And I don't think that's necessarily unique to Britain. Of course, I think that's probably true for many other countries as well. But I think the economic situation doesn't look good. There's been huge austerity cuts, hollowed out, et cetera, et cetera. All that's true.
Yeah, but, also so that there's just this life prospects. Yeah. But then you kind of, take a step back from that. Well, what about just day-to-day life for a teenager,
exactly,
And like, that's just as depressing, frankly,
I think, look, I was a teenager a long time ago now. I don't think my life was as, I think kids today have it really, really hard. That's my impression, seeing the few kids that I'm in touch with or whatever. But I think you're right. But why is that? And where is that coming from? First of all, I think let's give a bit of texture. A few episodes ago, listeners will know I did an episode with Comrade Felix, which was talking more generally about how youth see no future. And that wasn't specific to a given country, although he was talking about the Canadian context. I think that's even more true here. That the sense about what's the point? What's there to do? I think all those things are true, but if we also look at the direction where this country is going, we've had racist riots here. Look at the, reform is of course like a huge deal, but now Restore, an even far right party, is like outflanking reform. So I think I want to put all of this in the context of that, if that's okay. What do you think about it?
Well, obviously, we're a bit controversial on the left because we talk about this idea of the working class turning to the right, which, I mean, is quite undisputable. But anyway, that's, there's more contradiction in youth. But if you go into those kinds of, those former rundown working class towns, it's very much the same direction of travel for young people there as well, And it's really because, like working class people, you look at these successive governments, whether it's been the Tories or Labour or the Lib Dem coalition, like it's just failure. Like each successive government keeps taking more and more and more. Everything gets more expensive. Everything just gets worse. And I mean, for young people, whilst they have less experience of all this stuff, they see it in exactly the same way. And so then you have people like Farage or Rupert Lowe or even Tommy Robinson who have this like staunch opposition to these arseholes. And it's like, you can see why you'd look there, know?
Yeah. I think this was a theme running throughout the issue about how the right picks up on the legitimate grievances and then gives it a really inflammatory, reactionary direction. But we can't deny that there are real legitimate grievances based on the complete hollowing out of entire communities, societies, which in this country goes back, at least 4 decades now after, as you said, following the miners' strike. So that's definitely a thing.
And, I think Nigel Farage, he's either the first or second most popular politician on TikTok right now.
Is he?
Yeah, in Britain. And that says a lot. And even that, what's his name? Robert Jenkins, that Tory defector. Like, he's like 5th on this list,
Are you
right?
serious?
Yeah.
So like old white guys.
But that's just a reflection of the popularity of these guys in young people, I mean, there are liberals on there too. Like, it's not, I think Zach Polanski's on there, for example. It's not like dominated by the right.
Of course, yeah.
But that, again, that shows that kind of split in youth.
Yeah. Okay. And there's a lot more to be said here, I think, in terms of giving some texture for it. One thing, I think, again, I talked about this in an episode with Comrade Felix. If non-British audience hasn't seen it, go watch that show, Adolescence, which you still haven't even seen.
No,
which is a crime.
I haven't.
But I don't know why I really love that show is just because for me, I do think it gives a pretty realistic look at what the real life personal social implications of such a decaying imperialist country look like. Okay, so we've talked about why this is important for the left. We've given our listeners a bit of a sense of the state of the country in terms of youth. And yeah, it is tough. I mean, yeah, I think that if I could just add a couple of things onto that. One thing, when I first came to this country, one thing that really surprised me is that the worst performing demographic in Britain, or maybe this is just England, is working class white boys. That demographic is the worst performing when it comes to school outcomes. It's not the immigrants, it's not black and brown people, it's actually white working class people, which to me, I was really kind of messed with my head because, coming from like a leftist thing and, where the left is like, oh, white privilege. And I'm like, wait, what? What's going on here, So that was to me really interesting. But when you read about it, like you really do see how, like, I don't know the historic reasons or anything like that. But again, maybe I'll just link it back to that show, Adolescence, and just the ongoing discussion that there is about misogyny and the manosphere and all of that stuff and how the right-wing trend in the country. I think all of this it's really like what's at the base of this society.
I think the other thing is the kind of the liberal ideology that obviously dominates in government, but also in schools by teachers, like young white boys are like the lowest of the low, It's like there is obviously look at it's reform and restore. They talk a lot about anti-white racism in this country, right? And I mean, obviously it's not quite true, but like it's very clear why that resonates with young white men.
Yeah,
because when they're growing up through through school,
the institution, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Speaking of schools, I was just in terms of preparing for this podcast, I wanted to see what the left is saying and what specifically the education union is saying, and it will come as no surprise that, of course, the National Education Union, which is the largest education union in, if I'm not mistaken, all of Europe, but certainly in this country, their general secretary released a little statement following Keir Starmer's announcement where he called this the right call. If I could just quote from a little bit of his statement, he says, quote, "After tireless campaigning and pressure from parents, teachers, and health professionals, we're now seeing meaningful action from the government. Raising the age of access on social media to 16 is the right call. School staff see every day how social media is harming children, disrupting their learning, isolating them, and is exposing them to content they are simply not ready for." So that is the National Education Union. We'll come to the left in a second, but I want to just obviously talk about the reactions we're seeing and the general attitudes in society to social media. Because I think we're against this ban, but we also see and understand and acknowledge that social media isn't like paradise. It does have lots of harmful implications for young people well. So,
obviously you have to take this with a pinch of salt, but the government numbers suggest that 9 in 10 parents are for the social media ban. And okay, those numbers are probably a bit dodgy, but it's definitely, at least in my impression, true that most parents are overwhelmingly for, this ban.
Yeah.
And there is, they are responding to legitimate concerns. There is all kinds of dodgy stuff that goes on, various kinds of child exploitation and blackmail and all of this nasty stuff, which is rising. And as well, the rise of misogyny is seen through social media. And also, a lot of racism and anti-immigrant stuff, everything that we see in society, to be honest. But so, you can understand people wanting to sort of wrap their kids up in cotton wool.
Yeah.
I think the problem really is that for kids, we've talked about how depressing society is. And so they have really just this one thing. It's not like there are youth centers or there are
they're all gone.
Yeah, anywhere to go, really.
There's not much to do.
No, I mean, even going to the park with a few cans is you're at risk of getting arrested these days. Nothing's lax anymore,
Yeah.
So for kids, you have this one little window into a bit of independence, right? That's kind of what social media is. Yeah, so bad stuff, sure, but for them, that means so much more than kind of, all the kind of negative side effects. And of course, most people, young people, see themselves as being able to protect themselves from it and so on. This is where we get to kind of the problem here, because if you actually want to kind of, fight the kind of degenerated side of the internet, you really have to actually get into society, the reality that
there's degenerates out there in society which are now on the internet. Hello. So
exactly. I mean, everything that happens on social media is just kind of an extension from real life. It's all happening and a response to everything that's real.
Yeah. I want to ask you to elaborate a little bit because, look, I agree with you, of course, about that social media is a bit of space where kids can have their autonomy and independence. That's a word you used. I can imagine that if somebody's listening to that who's not a communist or a Spartacist, they might be like, what are you talking about? It's not independent. There's all these pressures. You have to conform and these beauty standards for young girls and la la la. It's not independent. It's actually really restricting.
Okay. I mean, look, social media is contradictory.
Yeah.
But let's just try and run through a day of a child for a second, like a teenager, right? So you get up, you go to school, right? You get to school, you're lined up like you're some kind of soldier waiting to go into class.
Yeah.
And you're told to sit in silence. If you talk to your friends and you get told off, even potentially sent off or other, potential punishments, okay, you have to bear through all of this. At lunchtime,
Let's not forget that the kid's probably not really learning at all.
Yeah, I mean, that's secondary. This is school we're talking about, right? So, then at lunch, then you kind of have to deal with all the friction that's going on in society in general. Like you're in this kind of squash of, tension and so on. All the questions outside of school are brought inside of school. So then you got that. Then you go home if you're your average sort of working class kid, then what have you got to do at home? Well, maybe watch a bit of TV, not a lot else, So yeah, like compare that and then compare this thing. Okay, yeah, it's not all, obviously there's a lot of bad stuff, but you can also just scroll through TikTok for hours and suddenly you're not thinking about all this, shit that you've just been through it during this day. It's suddenly like, whatever you're into. And again, of course, it's contradictory. There will be stuff that might not be great, but,
Are you promoting brain rot, Tom?
I'm not, but you have to understand it as a response to like something real.
Yeah, I think that's the point. That it's a contradictory thing, and its appeal, the gigantic appeal of social media, especially to young people. But, by the way, there's growing studies about how retirees, like retired men, are also like their screen time has gone way through the roof. My mother complains about this anyways. But like it's the same question that you have these like demographics who don't have something meaningful happening for them in the real world. I think it's so then you retreat into this online world where all of a sudden you can access something seemingly from anywhere on the planet and go into so many different directions. And some of those are corrupting, some of those are harmful, but some of those are also not.
Yeah.
But again, I think what the liberals, what the governments, what they're incapable of and what they don't want to draw attention to is the fact that this is a byproduct of the fact that real social life out there in the world is not so great for young people, I think.
And I think, before this, so the most recent social media came the porn ban. And I think this
Explain to our listeners what that porn ban is, because it's not clear.
Okay, so essentially at the end of last year, they brought in regulations. So if you go on a porn website, you have to show your ID on it
to get age verified.
Yeah. And the idea was to, like with the social media, to block harmful content from kids. But I think this was a lot more kind of a deeper reflection of where society is at, because with porn it's a response to something a lot more sort of kind of more intimate and deeper, like social relations between people in general, but particularly boys and girls are I don't think there's been really a society where there's been so much distance, well, not in terms of this kind of society and we're kind of at the point where firstly, you still have the same social conditions. Even if you manage to get past the social restraints, where are you going to go and sort of
do it?
Yeah. Where is a private place that you can access?
Doesn't exist.
Exactly. But, so you have this situation where young people, and it's not ideal, it's not natural, it is contradictory. It's not good, in fact, in general. But it's kind of like suddenly porn is your only kind of sexual release,
Yeah.
For a lot of these young people.
Yeah, what that's making me think of is nowadays there's more and more articles about AI girlfriends.
Yeah.
And it's like a little bit of the next step of, okay, if this is sort of your release on a sexual plane, but the fact that there's growing articles on how there's more and more AI girlfriends because that's your emotional release.
Well, exactly. I mean, emotional and sexual, the two things come together.
Yeah.
But it's watching a video, it's not very fulfilling, obviously. So you kind of have this, as you say, this is where AI comes in. But there's also but it is that reflection again of the inability to interact, and also we should come to the girl side of things, but for boys, it's really for the last sort of at least 15 years, there's really been this chipping away at kind of what is acceptable and what isn't, like in terms of like, you know, hitting on people when like trying to like make your moves and stuff, you know. And I know I can already feel the Liberals are gonna hate where I'm going with this, but like look, there is a certain thing, like obviously no means no, like it, like you, that's a principle that everyone has to live by.
Yeah.
But the Liberals have brought so much kind of like bullshit into it that like frankly like young boys are just scared to like go and make that move, you know.
I don't think this is just about young boys anymore. I think the fact that I've talked to people in their 30s and they're like, I don't know how to speak to women at the bar anymore.
That's true too, yeah.
Because what if you accidentally end up like just coming across as a jerk?
Yeah, or being
because you don't know what the like acceptable sort of norms are. And there's online dating, of course, like that's just become the norm. But I think there's a huge fear of what's appropriate or not.
It's really trying to just give a picture of youth where they're at, not just in terms of their material conditions, but like in terms of their consciousness as well, you know?
Yeah. What it makes me think of, and this is nothing new, of course, but it's just this deep alienation that, of course, is, you know, key to class society and capitalist society, but that it's just like it's on steroids now. I feel like it's just gotten to new heights where the level of alienation from like your community, your mates, etc. It's getting to a really high level.
Well, I think on steroids is quite a accurate term, because obviously it's, in a certain sense, you know, alienation and isolation is nothing new, but the level it's at. And I think, you know, whilst we're talking about this, I don't think we can leave out lockdowns either on this,
for sure.
because that, I mean, things were already going backward, right? But particularly in Britain, by the time lockdowns came in, you know, kids were forced to, you know, not go to school, stay at home. Obviously, what that meant for women, that sent them backwards. But in terms of like the socialization of kids, you know, like if you're a secondary school student, those 5 years, like each one of those years is like quite a like important period in your development and your in kind of how you socialize in the world. So to miss that, you know, I mean, one of our friends who works at a uni, I remember him commenting a few years back that, you know, when kids go up to university, they're not dealing with 18-year-olds anymore. They're dealing with 14, 15-year-olds, you know?
Yeah. And one of our teacher friends, I think a regular conversation is just like, what I hear is like, it's the same thing, you know. So in secondary school, kids who come in, they're at the level of like primary school, like new cohorts that come into year 7, year 8, etc. Like they don't know how to cope. They're not, they're extremely needy. They treat their teachers like their mothers. They have no sense of like, how to socialize, boundaries, personal space, none of that stuff. And not to mention on the academic side of things that they've lost, you know, secondary school kids lost important years of socialization, of course. But I think if you look at younger kids, they lost those years where they learned basic skills of like reading and writing. So there's lots of studies done across the board. I don't know about other countries, but in Britain, definitely that like basic reading skills have gone down, basic numeracy skills have gone down. And there's been a number of studies done that this is going to have long-term implications for like a kid's life chances, you know, in terms of their like general broad outcomes growing up. But I think all of this, again, just to bring back to the picture of like, you're here in this country, things are not going well for youth, for the government, for anybody. I mean, for minorities, like it's like a full-on like mess, you know. I mentioned earlier there's been racist riots. There's like random and increasing news of like isolated attacks against minorities following these like racist events. There's far-right parties like increasing. Then you've got youth who don't have a future. Then you've got the government. I mean, Andy Burnham just won. But, you know, I was thinking actually recently that you had like the Tory government where it was like, they couldn't hang on to like a prime minister. You know, there was like 3-4 different prime ministers, and Keir Starmer, but he's got like a scandal after scandal after scandal. So like there's a real deep like problem going on here.
Yeah.
So you're not going to be able to fix this with a ban. I think that's the bottom line. But I think when it comes down to it, what's the left doing, and what should we do to, or like what's our responsibility in the face of this? You know, as at the outset, you said we need to win these young people. This is an attack. This is going to set a dangerous precedent for like the socialists and pro-Palestinian people. But what I imagine is that when it comes to social questions, it's always gets 10 more layers of complications. For example, I read out the quote by the General Secretary for the Education Union, who is actively for the government policy, you know, and I'm sure if he had it his own way, he would make it much stricter, you know.
Yeah. Oh, sure, yeah.
So I think it's a question of like, how do we actually make a wedge? Because, you know, you mentioned, okay, there are legitimate fears that parents have. And now let's be real, like, you know, a lot of those parents will be working class parents because they want to protect their kids. Yeah. Then you've got teachers who 1,000,000% love this policy because, again, they are like, I got to protect the kids and kids are bad. So I got to make sure they're good, and we're going to make them good by getting rid of social media. So these are segments of the movement which we also need to convince that, hey, look, this is not the way forward if you want to fight for youth. You know, as your article says, youth need a future. They don't need this ban. So how could we equip some listeners who might be listening about how to actually push back on those arguments? Because I tried. I was speaking with a colleague, you know, she's got 2 kids. They're very young. And she was receptive to my general arguments. Like, okay, look, this is, you know, the social media is not the real problem. It's really the underlying like problems in society along some of the lines that we were talking about, you and I. And that, you know, what you need to do is you need to really actually have basically better ways of integrating youth into society. You know, it's a question of how we're socializing youth. And if the socialization out there is miserable, then its expression on social media is going to be miserable. And she was very receptive to those points. But then her conclusion was, look, you're right, but it's bad out there. And kids are vulnerable. They're young people. They're vulnerable. So we just have to shelter them for as long as possible. And to be honest, I felt a bit disarmed because I'm not like, you know, like she's a parent. She's coming from like a place of concern. And I'm not going to like.
I mean, it's a very fair point. Like, and honestly, most of the people that are for this ban are, you know, have legitimate concerns, you know. They're not a reactionary of any sort of the word, you know. I think the point is this, like, to actually win this future that youth do need, you need to win the youth to such prospects, you know?
I think that's nicely put, yeah.
And frankly, you're not going to do that if, like the liberal establishment, you are standing in favor of this ban, you know? It puts an immediate, like, line against you. We shouldn't draw the line on whether you're for or against the ban. But kids will, because this really gets to like something that's so central to how they live their lives in today's society.
Yeah. I mean, do you not think we should draw the line at if you're for or against the ban? I mean, certainly I don't know.
No, I mean, why would we? Like, for example, like obviously we have to win people away from that position. But like, imagine if you're on a picket line, right?
That's a fair point.
And someone's like, and you're having a conversation and someone's like, you're talking about this for whatever reason and they're for the ban. What, you're going to tell them to get off the picket line? Like,
no.
Exactly.
Thank you. That's fair enough. That's a nice explanation. No, I agree. Although I think like we definitely do need to push back against the left.
Yeah.
Which I was trying to do my research in preparation for this discussion about what exactly the left is saying. And look, maybe my research was inadequate, but I couldn't really find real articles that really took a clear stand. I think generally there's like, okay, you got to oppose the ban, which is fair. So this is a distraction from the real problems, which I guess is not.
It's a truth.
It's a truth. I think we've said something similar. But I think like where the left falls short is not really taking it to the level of like addressing those obstacles and having that perspective that this is going to like putting yourself in opposition to the youth is going to not endear them to the socialist movement and it's going to create a backlash and plus also, you know, set dangerous precedents for the rest of the left. I don't know. What do you think?
We have to understand something pretty important about the question of youth in general, but particularly when it comes to social media, and that is that it comes with a lot of liberal moralisms,
Mm-hmm.
In fact, not entirely wrong moralisms, obviously it's correct to have the impulse to protect kids, but, like the questions of youth sexuality and, those kind of subjects that are uncomfortable for liberals to take up and kind of just want to pretend it's not a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, like the left shares a lot of those moralisms,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they use a lot of them against us sometimes. But so I think you have to understand that, like the left, ultimately the left has not made us flip from liberalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are certain questions which, and most of the left does oppose this ban. It's not that they don't. It's just that if they take it up too effectively, then they suddenly
alienate themselves from the liberal.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think, for example, again, looking back at the National Education Union, there's a lot of leftists in that union. A lot of the left actually quite likes Daniel Kabede, the general secretary. So to then go head to head and make a frontal challenge on that question would really put them at odds.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they're not ready to sacrifice. Whereas for us, I think we'd want to be like finding ways of inserting a wedge between like what Daniel Kabede's policy is for protecting youth and actually building, the base of the union, the teachers, and finding a way to actually improve schools, which his policy isn't really doing. Because what has he done? Because if you make schools better, more enjoyable, actually equip young people with the skills they need for the future, then actually is addressing the social media problem, like not in a qualitative way, but marginally it is, because it's what you put out there.
Exactly. And I think the other thing to touch on a similar note is that, again, we've talked a lot about how the left has become sort of disconnected from the working class, but that applies to youth too. I mean, not so much that sort of petty bourgeois student layer of youth, but just your general sort of young person who, lives in Northampton and goes to school and whatever and just lives a normal life.
Yeah.
Like, frankly, they've got no idea.
Yeah, for sure. When we think about like the left recruits from the campuses, but the campuses, like they represent one sort of stream of youth out there who go through the academic route. Vast majority of them don't.
Yeah.
They don't take that route, increasingly so. So like it's a bit of a vicious cycle that the left has, like, the world is good, the country's getting radicalized because look at the university campuses, they're all wanting to become communists, whereas like actually you look at the vast majority of young people who are graduating and either not going into, there's this category of NEETs, not in education, employment, or training, that is reaching historic highs. Over 1 million young people, not in education, not in employment, not in any kind of training for employment, and if the left, if the trade union movement doesn't have answers for this, these are the people that Farage is waiting to mop up if he hasn't already.
Yeah.
But
also, a lot of the left rightly talk about how Farage won't, achieve anything decent for working class people. Obviously true. And there's sort of an implication, I think, particularly if you read like the Grantites, the RCP stuff, that once Farage fails, there's going to be like even more of a shift to the left.
It's very objectivist.
Yeah. But actually the reality is like the way things are moving, like once Farage it proves his inability, like things are just gonna shift to the right even more. And like these talking about NEETs, like honestly, this is really like a proto layer for something far more sinister than anything on the right that exists at the moment.
Yeah, potentially, unless something can be done, unless you can have, huge training programs, huge public works programs that can bring in those youth and bring them into the working class, which again is we have another article in there about how to fight for revolution, go into the working class. I think it's like, it really is a culmination of all the different points that we're talking about, that the left is totally irrelevant to the struggles of the mass of the working class. It's so isolated from the bulk of the working class. Then you've got youth, similar dynamics, but they're getting more and more repression, more and more oppression. And the task is like for the left to try and cohere itself in a way that's able to like offer a real working class solution to the legitimate grievances out there, and that means finding a road to bring youth into the working class. That could be the bridge that the left uses to sort of link back up, to enhance its influence and to actually revitalize itself. Because the left, well, the other thing it doesn't have is a lot of youth. I mean, the RCP is exceptional in that regard. But bulk of the left doesn't have a lot of young people. But
yeah.
Anyways,
I don't know if you want to maybe talk about kind of the broader implications of this ban as well a little bit. Or...
Yeah. So I think touching on the fact that this isn't just about the social media question and just about youth, but it has real sinister implications more broadly. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, Liz Kendall, who's sort of, kind of running the show on this question. So they've gotten this through, and obviously they know kids are going to find a way through this. I mean, it's not very hard to download a VPN and then, go on whichever site you want. And that's what most kids will do. So naturally, the government want to try and ban VPNs. Well, okay.
Would that be just for under 16s or just like ban VPNs?
In general.
In general.
That's the discussion. Yeah.
Seriously?
Yeah.
My God.
Because how do you know? Well, we were talking before. I said, I'm not into technology and stuff. I don't know the ins and outs. But as they're talking it really is just a blanket ban on VPNs, which, as I understand, is possible. But what does that mean for the left or trade union militants, pro-Palestine people in general? That's a big threat to them all. We all in the left, if we're sensible, we all use VPNs when we're, doing political work.
Yeah.
It's so without that layer of protection, I mean, it doesn't keep you completely safe, of course, but
it's a layer. Yeah.
Yeah.
So are you saying that that's next?
Well, we'll see. But in Liz Kendall's interview, they've decided the ban's happening. So how do you sort of
enforce it?
Yeah.
Make it real so that kids can't find workarounds.
Because a lot of organizations and charities and so on that are against the ban do it on the basis that, well, this is going to push kids into darker corners of the web. Which is true.
It is true.
And is a scary prospect. That's not the best reason to be against the ban, obviously. But, this is as well something that we have to be ready for, frankly. The reality is you can ban all these websites, but something exactly the same with a different name will pop up the next day. And that will just keep happening. And the more that happens, the more sort of dodgy they're likely to get,
Yeah, absolutely. So it's actually not helping keep kids safe.
Well, no, not at all. Yeah. And that's the other part of the debate. Well, if you want to keep kids safe, as these organizations are saying, it's not going to happen. And then the other thing Liz Kendall is talking about at the moment is how to, well, these are my words, but oppress, 17 and 18-year-olds as well, or 16 and 17-year-olds as well, so that once you become sort of legal for social media, how do you make it so that they can't just get immediate access into everything and so on?
So restricted social media.
Yeah,
16,
that's 17. Still.
It's so depressing.
But we do have to be clear. This, back to the point, this isn't just an attack on young people. It really is an attack on anyone who doesn't support the status quo.
Yeah, just looking, even the right wing, Nigel Farage has said the social media ban is well-intentioned, but it's unlikely to work given the mass adoption of VPN. So even the right, it seems, I need to do my research better, but even they are backing it, it seems.
Well, yeah, I think definitely in the more established right wing with the likes of Nigel Farage. But actually, if you go on social media and so on, the people most against this ban in terms of people with a bit of a profile is more right wing influencers, actually, because they're against digital ID. And it's so clearly a gateway to that question,
Right.
Talking about these right wingers, like, not to endorse them or anyway, but like their starting point often is just distrust of the government.
Which the left could take
Which, the left could take some examples from. Like, I know, of course, it's mixed up with all kinds of reactionary politics as well. But but honestly, most of them, they start off with opposing digital ID and the social media ban and so on, because they don't want more interference from the liberal establishment.
Right.
That's something the left should share with them, frankly.
Yeah. I want to start bringing this to a bit of a close. Now, look, I think there's been a broad-ranging discussion. I think the thing that I'm thinking of right now is there's absolutely zero youth movement in this country. There is a lot of support for the social media ban. So how do you suggest that, like, those who are opposed to the ban and who want to propose like a socialist road for how to fight for a future for the youth?
Yeah.
How should we actually do that concretely? Do you have ideas for that? Like, how do we even, I'm sure, like, as you said, there'll be tons and tons of youth upset with this. This might be an opening to politicize some youth in the right direction. Do you have any ideas for how to actually make an impact at the moment on this?
Well, if you're a teacher, for example, and you have students who are outraged at this ban, right? This is an opportunity for you to actually, like, first of all, like, engage in them on a sort of common political point, right? But also, like, try and argue over, like, the importance of your own class struggle in the school as well. Why these things are connected, why it matters that there's a united fight between youth and students, why it is the trade unions that are actually gonna be like the driving force in society.
Yeah, I think that's nicely put, because it could. I think the teachers, like, on the job, but also like within the unions. Like, how about we show that the teachers' unions are not the instruments of making the lives of youth even worse.
Exactly, yeah.
But actually are an ally in their struggle to gain a degree of freedom, on the social media question. I think that's definitely one. I think the trouble I anticipate is that so many teachers are for it. So I think it's to really appeal to those teachers who might be against it about the necessity for this. And I think one way to do that is to actually make it really a much broader question about the broader political implications of, like, what does this open the door to? It opens the door to even more policing of all kinds of activists and digital ID and so on and so forth, as you said. So I think that's definitely a thing.
But I think also, if you're, a trade union member, whatever that may be, whether you're in rail or a builder or whatever, and you've got teenage kids, it's also a chance to connect with them as well on these questions for those similar kind of reasons. And, like, the point, the basic point is that we have a shared struggle, right?
Yeah.
And that this question is like a starting point where we can work on our shared interest,
Yeah, I think that's nicely put. Yeah, because ultimately this is parents have a stake in this. It's just right now, I think a lot of them buy into the government's plans, but we need to be able to win them away through the advanced elements in the working class who would be against that. So yeah, I think that's nicely said. Anything else you want to add to this before we call it a day? I do want to briefly mention, I think I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned in the previous episode or not, but Australia I mentioned at the start. So they were kind of the vanguard in leading, like, really crazy social media bans. And we have an article in the same issue of Women in Revolution. It's just called Down with the Youth Social Media Ban. But I'll just read something out which shocked me when I first found out. It says, right. In the state of Victoria, a 14-year-old in Victoria can legally be sent to prison for life because they can be tried as adults for certain crimes, but they can't have an Instagram account. That just tells you how wrong things are.
But it also shows that really this question is not about protecting youth.
Yes, exactly. If you really wanted to protect youth, you would make a wholesale reappraisal of how society works, instead of looking at these band-aid measures which make it look like you're doing something but are really not. You're going to try kids, 14-year-olds, as adults for crimes, send them to prison for life, but they can't have social media. That's absurd.
Yeah. And whilst we're on the subject, talking about that young kid that died in Britain, that we have a little article on, what was his name?
Marcus Vacana.
Yeah. This is another example, this kid has consensual sex. Yeah. There's no debate on that.
Yeah, maybe you just explain that, because I don't think anybody will know. But yeah, Marcus Vacana, that's the name. At the time, I think 17 or 18 years old.
18, yeah.
Yeah, who got sentenced to a year in prison in the Emirates for having consensual sex with a girl who was about 6 months or several months younger than him. But they were in the same school year back in England. They were both on holiday there. The girl's mother reports him to the authorities back in the Emirates, where he still was. So they arrest him and they sentence him to prison because he's violated their age of consent laws. Even keeping in mind that in Britain, that's 16. And this guy's already over 16. So
and his girlfriend is too.
And his girlfriend is too. So, yeah. But what was the point you wanted to make on that?
Well, just in general, it's just about it's just another example of how the screws are being tightened on youth. That's really the underlying thing that's going on here. Of course, there are still liberals in charge in Britain, so of course they have to talk about youth safety and protection of young girls and all of these great things. But at heart, you can't escape the class interests, that are quite unnaturally quite explicit display if you just scratch beneath the surface a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most criminal thing on this terrain with liberals is that they feign this oh, we want to save the kids, we want to protect the kids, but they do it through complete and utter repressive ways, and they're able to use all manner of moral blackmail to convince huge layers of the population about it. But that blackmail works because there's a real problem in society. And I think the task for the socialist movement has to be to give a different, a working class answer to that, and not just go along with liberal fear-mongering about you got to protect the kids or life is over or whatever. It's not enough to just oppose the bans, which is, I think, it's a start. Of course, we shouldn't draw a line on that. It's not enough to just oppose it. Yes, it's a distraction from issues, which is what a lot of the left has said, but it's really you have to make a struggle within the union movements. In this case, the education unions is important, but also make a case within the working class to those concerned parents who want to back this because they're concerned for their kids about why this is not the road forward, and do it on the basis of fighting the liberal establishment as well as the right wing, because what youth need is a real future, and so does the working class, and so does this whole country. So that's really I think the way to bring all these things together, and I think it could be a basis. But unfortunately, I think this thing will just become a bit of, I don't know. I hope this becomes a bigger discussion within the left and the trade union movement. I don't think that's going to happen. I think I think it's going to keep being a little youth question, but it needs to be made a much broader question, because what's really posed is a future of the working class and young people.
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate. I sent you that thing the other day, BBC interview, and they're asking kids their responses. What are you going to do now that the social media ban is? And this teenage girl, she looks very straight in the camera and she says, "Stare at a wall." That's the reality that we're dealing with here. And the reality is that the left, talk about the left being disorganized and all of this, but the youth are even less organized. So unfortunately, this is unfortunately a starting point if things carry on in the current trajectory, and things are going to be a lot worse, not just in terms of online freedoms, but for youth in general, and the left and trade unions and working class and so on.
Yeah. All right. On that note, On that very positive note. Thank you very much. I appreciate having that discussion. I think it's unlike a lot of the discussions that happen on this show, because I think it really got into like the sort of texture of just how bad things are in Britain, but also I think just with youth. And for those of you listening, get in touch with us about your views on what we've said. Try and make that struggle in your workplace about how to fight the social media ban in a progressive working class direction, about, fighting to improve Britain, which is going to only come through fighting the ruling class. So on that note, I will leave you guys here. Thank you very much, Tom, for your time.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Well, I ain't got no smoke, at least not with you. And I don't know if you don't know, but there are just a few of oligarchs and capitalists profiting massive profits, holding us down in lockstep in your